The Lord be with you.
And also
and also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty eternal God, so draw our hearts to you, so guide our minds, so fill our imaginations, so control our wills that we may be wholly yours, utterly dedicated to you, and then use us to pray as you will, and always to your glory and the welfare of your people, through our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Now we're going to talk about Pontius Pilate, Claudia Procula, who is his wife, and Parrot Antipas. All three had a role in Jesus' last week. There's a lot about Pontius Pilate, and so I don't know if we need to go through all of that or not, but Carl, if you will, would you read the text from Mark in order, Mark, Matthew, and then John, and we'll talk about those briefly.
yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him in, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered, "You say so." Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the festival, he used to release a prisoner for them, any one for whom they asked. Now a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he asked them, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again. "Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call the King of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." Pilate asked them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified.
Carl's going to read next from Matthew, and I want you to listen a little bit and see how Matthew enhances the story.
Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You say so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner from the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him word, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, Which of the two do you want me to release for you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah? All of them said, Let him be crucified. Then he asked, Why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, Let him be crucified. So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. Then the people as a whole answered, His blood be on us and on our children. So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him, and then they led him away to crucify him.
Okay. And you're going to read from John and pay particular attention to the expansion of the story in John.
Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, What accusation do you bring against this man? They answered, If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you. Pilate said to them, Take him yourself and judge him according to your law. The Jews replied, We are not permitted to put anyone to death. This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, Are you the King of the Jews? Jesus answered, Do you ask this on your own, or do others tell you about me? Pilate replied, I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. Pilate asked him, So you are a king? Jesus answered, You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. So Pilate asked him, What is the truth? After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, I find no cause against him, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? They shouted in reply, Not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a bandit. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged, and the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews, and striking him on the face. Pilate went out again and said to them, Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no case against him. So Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die, because he has claimed to be the Son of God." Now, when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. He entered his headquarters again and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have power to release you and the power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside and sat on the judge's bench at a place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. He said to the Jews, "Here is your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate asked them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but the emperor." Then he handed him over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, with Jesus between them. Pilate also had an inscription written and put on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this inscription because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, in Latin, and in Greek. Then the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but this man said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written."
Thank you, Carl. There's not a lot known about Pilate other than what's in these scriptures and a few historical documents, and they are very contradictory because the New Testament, the Gospels, are really kind to Pilate, presenting him as a reasonable man who was forced by the crowd into condemning Jesus in spite of his belief that Jesus was innocent. The New Testament books were written at a time when the church was expanding through the Roman Empire, and there was little to be gained by bad-mouthing the Romans. So the Gospels each give their own emphasis to Pilate. They present him as conflicted, not knowing what to do. This has probably less to do with historical fact and more to do with a desire to show the Roman authorities that the Christians were no threat to them. Although worshiping a criminal executed by the Romans would seem to be a problematic thing to start with. We got Pilate's wife is only introduced in the one scripture in Matthew. That's the only place that she shows up, and we will talk about her a little bit later. John's Pilate, if you noticed, is the one that's the most reluctant to condemn Jesus and ask Jesus the question, "What is truth?" I'm sure you will remember the film, The Passion of the Christ, where all of these scriptural references were included. It was controversial at the time because it depicted the Jews as the evil ones and not the Romans. Some scholars believe that the Gospels were written this way to avoid Roman censorship and destruction. But before we get on with Pilate, let's go back and talk a little bit more about the Jews. And we talked about it before, that the power structure was such that the Jewish high priest and the others with authority held their positions at the pleasure of the Romans. In addition, their positions also depended on preserving their system, the observance of the law, and the way they had set up the temple as an opportunity to make money off of those who came to worship. So a threat to the validity of the law was as frightening to them as disorder in the streets was to the Romans. So Jesus threatened the status quo of both of these groups. Everything that we know of Pilate from non-biblical sources indicate that he was a brutal, vicious, and completely unfeeling person. Philo of Alexandria, the Greek Jewish philosopher, wrote that he was a man of inflexible, stubborn, and cruel disposition, and characterized his term in office as one of violence, robbery, assault, and abusive behavior, frequent executions without trial, and endless savagery. Herod Agrippa described him in a letter to the Emperor Caligula as naturally inflexible, a blend of self-will and relentlessness. So we have to take into account the consideration in the non-biblical accounts that Pilate's excesses were written by Jewish people who had little reason to be gentle with him. Pilate was of the family of the Ponti, an ancient, wealthy, and powerful Roman family from south central Italy. Because the family was important and powerful, it was natural that he would have a government post. He was appointed in the year 26, some 3 years or so before the crucifixion of Jesus. He was about the same age as Jesus. He was proud and hot-tempered, obstinate and aristocratic, capable of childish behavior when his will was crossed, and he was military-minded. But Judea, where he was assigned, was considered a God-forsaken outpost of the Roman Empire. So that likely means he was not particularly well regarded by his peers in Rome. Any Roman would have wanted to be governor in Spain or even Syria, but to be a governor in Jerusalem was almost an insult. Pilate undoubtedly arrived in Jerusalem already angry and hating the Jews and anxious to rub their faces in the Roman authority. There's an interesting point about that particular thing. Pilate seemed to forget that there was a long-standing concession to the Jewish people that Rome had made in order to keep the peace and to secure their control. They had legitimized Judaism to be practiced anywhere in the empire without a requirement that the Jews include the Roman gods in their worship. They also honored the sanctity of the temple in Jerusalem and didn't bring any graven images into the city, which included the soldiers, the troops' flags, which bore an image of the emperor and the patron god of that particular legion or that particular squad. Those flags with images were left outside the city walls when the soldiers entered Jerusalem. So Pilate's first official act when he arrived in Caesarea in 26 was to order the legions to bring their flags into Jerusalem. Sorry? Somebody say something. So that aroused the Jewish people to protest on religious grounds. They got a hearing with Pilate to complain. They were immediately surrounded by soldiers and threatened with instant death unless they stopped complaining. The Jews then laid down, baring their necks, declaring that they preferred death to the violation of their laws. Pilate was unwilling to kill so many, and so he yielded and removed the items. But worse than this, he used the sacred treasure of the temple to pay for an aqueduct to bring water into Jerusalem. A crowd came together and cried out against him, but he had mingled soldiers. Listen to this, I think you've heard it before. He had mingled soldiers dressed as peasants in the crowd, and So at any given signal, they began beating the Jews who were complaining. So the riot was subdued that way. So Pilate committed unpardonable sin in the eyes of the Jews by allowing the Roman soldiers to enter the sanctuary of the temple, which under Jewish law was a capital offense. There is another offense that's documented in Luke chapter 13, where the Galileans were slain at Pilate's order while sacrificing in the temple in Jerusalem. This particular story is not written anywhere else other than the Gospel of Luke, but it is in keeping with other recorded stories of Pilate's true temperament and actions. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay. As we talked about before, Pilate spent most of his time on the Mediterranean at Caesarea Maritima, which was the Roman capital. But he came into Jerusalem from time to time, particularly when there were great festivals. And we talked about the fact that at Passover time, the city was so full of pilgrims that it was in danger of exploding into violence or rebellion just because there were so many people. The Roman army was on full alert, and Pilate would have been in his palace in Jerusalem during that time. Despite the New Testament's presentation of Pilate as a man of reasonableness and honor, he was undoubtedly very irritated by Jesus, the troublemaker, who disrupted the commerce in the temple. He didn't care about what happened to Jesus. There is little question, however, that he would have enjoyed the opportunity to play cat and mouse with Caiaphas and the temple authorities, for whom he had nothing but contempt. Excuse me. Carl will read in a few minutes the account from Luke, where Pilate showed his contempt for Parrot Antipas, at the same time provoking Caiaphas when he sent Jesus to Herod for trial. He undoubtedly knew that Herod was superstitious and was terrified of anyone the people recognized as a prophet. Because Herod and Pilate both hated Caiaphas, they became more cordial with each other after this incident. Pilate baited Caiaphas by proclaiming Jesus' innocence, and finally, when he was tired, he condemned Jesus to death. That would have meant little to the man who had condemned hundreds of people to death, most without a trial. Pilate's brutality finally became too much even for the Romans, for whom brutality was a way of life. After 10 years of reign, a particular incident of cruelty was the last straw. The Samaritans believed that the law had been given to Moses on Mount Gerizim in Samaria, and a group of Samaritans made a pilgrimage there to honor some vessels that had allegedly been buried there by Moses. Pilate had them slaughtered at their holy site for illegal assembly. The governor of Syria complained to Rome, and in 36 CE, after 10 years of governorship, Tiberius recalled Pilate to Rome. While he was on the journey to Rome, Tiberius died, and Caligula ascended to the throne. There is no record that Pilate was ever tried, but it was common in ancient times to give people amnesty when a new king or emperor assumed power. Tacitus says that Pilate completed suicide in Rome, but the details are not known. Since Tacitus wrote about 75 years after the trial of Jesus, his account may have been influenced by Christian oral tradition and may not be a reliable source. Tacitus was not a Christian, but he undoubtedly knew of Christian traditions, and suicide was common among those who had been disgraced. So this is a reasonable thing. The Coptic or Egyptian Orthodox Church venerates Pilate as a saint. They believe that he converted to Christianity and was executed by the Senate. There is no evidence of this at all anywhere except for in Coptic tradition. Scholars were long baffled by the fact that there were no inscriptions about Pilate found anywhere in the ruins of Palestine, while there were inscriptions of even petty Roman officials commonly found on things. But Pilate is not a mythical figure because in the writings of Josephus, Philo, and Tacitus. Also, in 1961, there was an inscription found on a stone in Caesarea Maritima indicating that there was a building dedicated to Tiberius, and it says it was from Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea. Since then, a few bronze coins have also been found that were minted by Pilate in 29 through 32 CE. Excuse me. So he was indeed a historic character. Did he suffer any regrets about his role in Jesus' crucifixion? We don't know. The historical accounts and the biblical accounts are ambiguous. According to the historical accounts, it's unlikely, even though the New Testament shows Pilate distancing himself from the proceedings, which his wife probably had something to do with. Does anybody have any questions about Pilate or any comments, observations?
I would think that one of the reasons that he is not treated in the Matthew or Mark is that, while he is a significant figure, they don't want to emphasize him. I can see why they would just skip over the details about his reputation. So I think that's very plausible.
Thank you. Anything else?
I wondered if Pilate was particularly known for any anti-Semitic feelings. I mean, was he officially, an anti-Semite? Because not because of this, but I just noticed in many of the gospel readings that there were certain verses that could have been just taken right out of context to be used in history against the Jews.
Mm-hmm. No. Yeah, well, as far as Pilate goes, yes. I mean, he didn't care for the Jews at all. I mean, he had them slaughtered when he thought he had a reason. The group on pilgrimage that I talked about, and the group that's actually documented in, I think it's the first chapter of Luke, where they were sacrificing in the temple, and it says something about their blood mixing with their sacrifice blood or something, where he had them slaughtered in the temple. So, yeah, I would say that that's a good point for him, that he didn't care about the Jews. Yeah, and that's another reason why I wanted Carl to go ahead and read, particularly in turn, because it says a lot about the Jews. But what I have been taught is that it's talking about the Jews who were against Jesus, not the Jews. For example, in John, it talks about the Jews disfavorably, but it talks about Israel favorably. So it's talking about a specific group of Jews, which would be the ones that were against Jesus, the ones that probably were in power. That would be my answer to that. Do our two priests have any other comments about that?
I agree with that.
Thank you. Anything else?
I take it that I'm going to play with John the Baptist and Jesus. But John the Baptist obviously was with Herod. Was Herod and Pilate, were they contemporary at all, or did they?
Yes. Herod, no, they did not like each other until the commonality of the Jesus thing, and that will be in. We're going to talk.
I remember that. I remember that story now too.
We're going to talk about.
I had my shot today. I'm sort of.
I'm sorry. I get one tomorrow. I'm so excited. So let's move on to Claudia. Claudia Procula. The only biblical reference to her is in Matthew 27, which we heard Paul read just a few minutes ago. This is all that we know about Pilate's wife from the New Testament. She was one of many women who remain unnamed and are only identified with their husbands. I'm talking about in the Bible. However, there's Christian literature, legends, and tradition that have added to her story. She plays a part in the New Testament Apocrypha, which are writings by early Christians that give accounts of Jesus' teachings or the teachings of his apostles in their lives. Many of these apocryphal books were considered scripture by early Christians, but since the Synod of Hippo and the councils of Carthage under St. Augustine in the late 4th century in northern Africa, the New Testament has consisted of the same 27 canonical books that we use today. So the apocryphal book, the Gospel of Nicodemus, identifies Pilate's wife as Claudia Procula and as a granddaughter of the Emperor Augustus. And somewhere she's also identified as an illegitimate child of one of Tiberius' mistress, the Emperor Tiberius' mistress. The Gospel of Nicodemus also says that she was a proselyte, which means she was a recent convert to Judaism. She was also among the women of higher class who were influenced by the Jewish religion. Her appearance is brief, and all we know about her and what caused her to be included among the nameless Bible women is told in those 38 words that Carl read out of Matthew 27. But because of her interest in Jesus' religion, she must have discussed him with Pilate. And the urgency of her plea revealed her concern about the tragedy that was facing Jesus. Calling Jesus an innocent man or a just man means that he had made a big impression on her, in contrast to those Jewish leaders who were looking to kill him. We can appreciate from that why she is venerated by the Greeks of Cappadocia and by the Ethiopian church. Legend says that she was baptized as a Christian. In homilies on Matthew, the 3rd century Christian writer Origen wrote that the dream God sent her was done in order to make her a Christian, although it is legend that she became Christian. As I mentioned when talking about Pilate, the Coptic Orthodox Church in Egypt believes that Pilate was killed by the Senate. In some ancient traditions, both Pilate and his wife were executed as Christians. That's something we don't know, but that is some ancient traditions. However, the Gospel of Nicodemus says that the Jews in authority tried to prevent Pilate's wife from interceding for Jesus. Some scholars believe that she is the Claudia that's mentioned in 2 Timothy chapter 4, where the name Claudia is included in a greeting to Timothy by people who were exiled with Paul after being sentenced to death. So it's a possibility that not only could she have been sentenced to death, she may have also been with the apostles and their disciples in exile. There's another tradition about Pilate's wife that comes from a letter written in Latin, which is claimed to have been written by her, found in a monastery in Belgium where it had been for centuries. It is said to have been read every Good Friday before the court assembled in Versailles during Louis XIV's reign in the 17th century. In some of the older communities of Europe, its reading follows the washing of the feet of the poor on Good Friday, in remembrance of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. I read it. I actually looked it up and read this letter. It was fascinating. It's a long, compelling letter, supposedly from Claudia to her friend Fulvia. She's in anguish over being associated with Jesus' death and said that they have been exiled to a Gallic mountain town. Pilate was full of remorse, and she was scorned by Rome as well as Jerusalem. She goes on to talk about her son Pilate, who was disabled, and her Jewish friend whose child had fallen sick and died, but had been raised from the dead by Jesus. Pilate also became very ill with the same sickness, and Jesus healed him from the sickness and also healed his withered foot, which was his disability. She spoke of the pure love that was in Jesus and that the room where her friend's child was raised from the dead was just full of love. She spoke also of the horror of her dream and her attempt to warn Pilate. She spoke of the demons that poured out of the faces of the high priest and the council who wanted Jesus dead. And she grieved because Pilate's indecision, fear, and concern for his ambition kept him from doing the right thing and freeing Jesus. She prays that Pilate will go to his own judgment without fear. It is unknown when this letter was written, but it uses words from the Apostles' Creed. He suffered under Pontius Pilate, which she brings that up as being something written in history about Pilate's, devastating deed, and that brought her great grief that was documented for all time. But so the Apostles' Creed wasn't finalized until late in the 4th century. So we don't know. This is another legend, I guess, but it sure was an interesting letter to read. And as I've said before, both Pilate and Claudia are saints in some Christian traditions. So that's all I've got on her. Does anybody have any comments or observations?
It is interesting because we don't know of anybody in the meeting with her and Pilate. Maybe she told the story about what happened, but I guess there's no real, and the only real reason for the story is to, I guess, soften Pilate to some degree. So anyway, it's an interesting story and how it gets instead of it. I'd always try to figure out how they get stories of what Jesus said or what other people did when there was nobody there to tell that story, unless.
Right. Well, like I said, and I don't remember, it was, I think I said Coptic Christians, Egyptian, that had Pilate as a saint. So it could have come from that tradition. Somebody who was making him, who knows? But anyway, it's fun stuff, though. It's very interesting. Anybody else have any comments about Claudia or questions?
Wikipedia says that she did become a Christian.
Yeah. We don't know, but yes. She is a saint in certain traditions, so we hope so.
And I hope for Pilate, too.
Oh, yeah. No kidding. Anybody else? Okay, Carl, can you read the passages from Luke and the little short passage from Acts?
Then the assembly rose as a body and brought Jesus before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man perverting our nation, forbidding us to pay taxes to the emperor, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, a king." Then Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered, "You say so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no basis for an accusation against this man." But they were insistent and said, "He stirs up the people by teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee where he began, even to this place." When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him off to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had been wanting to see him for a long time, because he had heard about him and was hoping to see him perform some sign. He questioned him at some length, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. Even Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then he put an elegant robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. That same day, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other. Before this, they had been enemies. Pilate then called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was perverting the people, and here I have examined him in your presence, and have not found this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither was Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he has done nothing to deserve death. I will therefore have him flogged and release him." Then they all shouted out together, "Away with this fellow! Release Barabbas for us!" This was the man who had been put in prison for an insurrection that had taken place in the city for murder. Pilate wanted to release Jesus, address them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no ground for the sentence of death. I will therefore have him flogged and then release him." But they kept urgently demanding with loud shouts that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, the one who had been put in prison for insurrection and murder, and handed Jesus over as they wished. Acts 4:27. For in this city, in fact, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, gathered together against your holy servant, Jesus, whom you anointed.
You notice that Luke calls those against Jesus were Gentiles, not Jews. I just thought that was an interesting point. It's one of the reasons I included that from Acts. So now we've got Parrot Antipas. He was the son of Herod the Great by his wife Malthus, which was one of his 9 simultaneous wives. I'm talking about Herod the Great now, and 9 simultaneous wives. Herod Antipas and his brother Herod Archelaus, according to Josephus, were brought up in Rome by an aristocrat whose name is unknown. Antipas was designated to be Herod's primary heir, although, as we discussed in our first meeting, when Herod died around 4 BCE, the Emperor Augustus divided the kingdom among Herod's 3 sons, Antipas, Archelaus, and Herod Philip. Antipas is the Herod most oftenly referred to in the Bible, although he was actually a tetrarch, not a king, as he is referred to in the Gospel of Mark. Matthew and Luke get it right. A tetrarch was a ruler with more or less monarchical powers, but ruled under the control of Rome and only a portion of a whole kingdom. It was Antipas that Jesus called that fox in Luke 13 when warned by some Pharisees that he was wanting to kill him. It was Antipas for whom Salome danced, afterward demanding the head of John the Baptist. And Antipas is the one who questioned and ridiculed Jesus at his trial, which we've heard much of tonight. Antipas is only named by his dynastic name Herod in the New Testament and in Josephus' writings and on his own coins. So I'm just going to call him Herod too from now on because it's easier and you have the history now. So like his father, Herod sponsored a big building campaign. He built a new capital city, Tiberias, on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, also known as Lake Gennesaret, which we've read about. This was highly offensive to the Jews, however, because he not only abandoned the holy city of Jerusalem, but he built his new capital on the site of a famous graveyard. And Jews could not enter a graveyard without becoming ritually unclean. So every faithful Jew who had to go to the city of Tiberias was then required to go through a complex ritual of purification. Herod also decorated his palace with figures of animals, which is a direct violation of the second commandment on graven images and worshiping man-made things. And to add further insult, he divorced his first wife, Areta of Nabatea, and married his brother, Herod Philip's wife, Herodias, who was also his niece. I have to think about that for a minute. She had abandoned Herod Philip after bearing his daughter Salome. This angered the Jews, but also infuriated his first wife's father, Aretas IV, and precipitated a border war with the Nabateans that cost Herod a large part of the eastern part of his kingdom. The marriage to Herodias also incurred loud criticism from John the Baptist, who invoked the Levitical law in claiming that the marriage was adulterous. Herodias hated John and eventually prevailed upon Herod, Herodias being Herod's wife, hated John and eventually prevailed upon Herod, who feared John, to arrest him. Soon thereafter, in his lust for his stepdaughter Salome, Herod promised her anything she wanted, up to half of his kingdom. She demanded the head of John. The superstitious Herod was terrified, but he dare not renege on a promise made in public, so he relented. Herod was a cruel, ambitious, and lustful man, despite the fact that the Bible treats him as something of a tragic figure controlled by his manipulative wife, Herodias. The Romans did not like or trust him, even though he had been raised in Rome and was very pro-Roman. According to the Synoptic Gospels, that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Herod was also a shadow of death over Jesus. In these accounts, Herod and the Herodians, which were probably Herodian officials, saw Jesus as a threat to be eliminated. However, it's not stated exactly why Jesus was a threat. As a matter of fact, the Gospel of Luke builds up tension between Herod and Jesus, marked by equal fascination and rejection. When they finally meet in Jerusalem during Jesus' trial, an almost absurd scene evolves. First, Herod is said to be exceedingly glad to see Jesus, since for a long time he had hoped to see him perform a miracle. But when Jesus remains silent, his excitement turns to contempt and mockery. Some of you of a particular age may remember Herod in the Broadway musical Jesus Christ Superstar, where Herod told Jesus mockingly, "Prove to me that you're no fool, walk across my swimming pool," that kind of mockery. Herod finally dresses him in a bright, shining robe and sends him back to Pilate, who sent Jesus to Herod in the first place when he learned that Jesus was from Galilee. Perhaps it's not surprising that scholars disagree on how to interpret Luke's view of Herod's role in the execution of Jesus. Was the mockery and dressing of Jesus a sign of condemnation or acquittal? While Luke himself states the latter, Herod is nonetheless later remembered as one of those responsible for Jesus' execution, as we just heard from the little reading from Acts. Caligula made Herod's younger brother Agrippa king of the regions around Galilee in 39. At Herodias' urging, Herod went to Rome to protest. Herod and Herodias both felt he should have that title and those lands. It was a bad thing to do. He didn't take into consideration that he was thoroughly disliked in Rome, while Agrippa was one of their favorites and a personal friend of many in the imperial family. Parrot Antipas was accused of treason against the emperor and was exiled to Gaul, where he remained for the rest of his life after 43 years as a tetrarch. Caligula spared Herodias because she was Agrippa's sister, but she chose to join Herod in Gaul, where she also remained. The date of Herod's death is not known. Also, it's not known if Herod Antipas and Herodias had any children. Herod's lands were added to Agrippa's kingdom. And that's all I have on these guys. Next week, we'll talk about Peter. There's a lot on Peter. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Observations?
I just want to say that somehow you've made these people seem more like real people and not just myth. I mean, I know that many of them are historical figures.
Historical.
Considered to be historical figures, but still, it just makes them seem more like real people.
Yeah, well, I'm going to assume for the most part they were real people. It's the stories surrounding them that get to be built up into legends, and
that's true.
So it's hard to know what the actual facts are, but we do know that they played parts, and we do have some evidence of how they've been treated in different traditions. So, like being made saints. Pilate and his wife are both saints in certain Christian traditions. So,
Shari, where did you find the transcript of Claudia's letter? I would love to read the whole thing.
I Googled it. But I could probably send it somewhere. It was fascinating. It was sad, and it was long. I mean, it was a pretty long letter. But I can try to dig it up. But I think I just Googled it, or maybe I went to one of the databases that I got access to here. But I did read it, so I'll try to dig it up and send it to
Melinda.
and let her send it to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm making myself a note. Yeah, that was really interesting. And when I saw that was part of her legend, I knew I had to read it, and so I found it, but I couldn't tell you where I found it. So.
Tiberias was known as a Roman town, a Roman city, and it's not too far from Gennesaret, which they have a big caboose.
Caboose. A caboose.
Yeah, that's it. Anyway, and that's where they probably went out and the boat fishing and stuff. But you can look down at Tiberias, which is a town. They have wonderful what's called Peter fish, which is a fish that has a cross on it. So they call it Peter fish. It's sort of a white fish, but it's very good. But then they wouldn't go down there because that was Roman, and Romans and Jews didn't get along. Along with I was interested in the town on the coast that Herod was at. Not Herod, but Pontius Pilate was at, and then came up to Jerusalem. I forgot the name. It's not Caesarea, is it?
Yeah, Caesarea Maritima on the.
It was a Roman port. There are no natural ports in Israel, and obviously Rome wanted to have a port, so they built this Caesarea, and it was a Roman town again, where Pontius Pilate stayed and other Roman officials. It was very luxurious, and in that area is luxurious today also.
I found on YouTube a reading of Claudia's letter.
Thank you, Cap.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. Especially the thing that struck me was that even if it was, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th century, whatever letter, the thing that struck me was the description of the room where Jesus raised his child was full of love. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know. I was touched by that. Me too. Anybody else have any comments or observations?
Thank you, Shari.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate your work. And as we go to Peter next week.
Go to Peter, then the three Marys, although I may change it from three Marys. I think it's three Marys in John, but it's the women. There's two Marys and other names in the other scriptures, but yeah, the women at the cross the next week, and then the last week will be the the guys on the cross with Jesus, and Barabbas and the centurion, I think, if I remember correctly.